Good evening and good morning. Welcome to this week's pronunciation practice. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. That is an accurate statement. And so that's what we're going to work on. So I will give you a few seconds if you would like to try recording it. You at home, same thing. Otherwise, you're just looking at me sitting here. But why don't you try recording it and then when the lesson is done, record it again and compare the difference. So, dozo. Okay, I don't want to give you too long to do that. So, let's go to the marked sentence. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. Okay, let's just look at the phrasing and the rhythm to start with. First phrase, improving your pronunciation. Pronunciation has two stressed syllables. One is always primary and one is secondary, daiichi, daini. And in this case, pronunciation, right? The second stressed one is has a little more push to it, pronunciation. Not pronunciation, pronunciation. Improving your pronunciation. Try to tap, and obviously you have three small syllables between these two and just one in there. So remember, it's not like a robot. The idea is to just keep your words connected and flowing and be sure to, you know, stress the stress ones. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard. Da is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. That one's pretty even. Look, there's two here, two here, two here, as you may have been taught to believe. So if you were measuring it, they would probably be very even. Other places might not be exactly even in the same way. And each phrase has a separate rhythm frame. So trying the whole thing together, we're starting on the upbeat, right? Improving. We tap the downbeat. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. Now, here's a note. Improving your pronunciation is not, there's a very clear dip in the melody and more space there. Next one is not as hard as, you could make that whole thing one, is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. There's different ways that depending on how you speak. Is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. Taught to believe. I'm doing it this way. It's not as hard, so I'm not pausing for a long time. It's not as hard as you may have been taught, but there's still a shape in how we say it, a shape in the melody that helps the listener. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. Da 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 da, right? There's still some kind of shaping to it, the words that go together. If I just went, improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have, that would be really weird. So it's the words that make sense together. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. So let's go over the details starting from the beginning. improving. 3 syllables, right? Improving. Da da da. Improving. Start up, open. You don't have not right? Japanese has and only. We have and This is improving. Improving and your becomes your because it's unstressed. I like your name. This is your book. We don't say this is your book. This is your name. Improving your pronunciation. 5 syllables. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Pronunciation. Improving your pronunciation and pronunciation, right? We want to connect our voice through the word. So we use the Y technique. Pronunciate. You have vowel followed by A, 2 different syllables. And so we need to pronunciation. Oh, I found a little mistake. The EA, just where I put probably I was looking at the English. So I guess it's okay. No, that's fine. It's an EA, but then where it's showing splitting up the IPA, it's the E and then the beginning of A. But no, this is right because I'm doing it for the English. Pronunciation. Oh, phew. I'm okay. Pronunciation. So use that Y in there so you can fully pronounce those 2 vowels. Pronunciate. EA. Pronunciation. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard. Now, that's the end of a phrase, but notice how I'm not completely in a hard way stopping. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard, right? The voice kind of winds down and it keeps going. I want to da 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 da. There's a thread of continuity that goes through it. Listen how that sounds. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard. Pronunciation is not as hard. It's just gentler the way I come. Maybe there is a tiny space there, but not pronunciation. Right? The way I come into it is with a yeah. We did this in my singers class, I think. I remember. Um, I forget what the context was, but it was starting. Oh, a, it's like ah, wow, instead of ah, yeah, You hear the difference, right? I'm kind of just slightly bringing in the voice and amplifying it. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard, is not as hard. Also, it's a small, quick word too. Is not as hard. Uh, uh. It doesn't feel like right? And that's all about the vocal cords. Using the vocal cords skillfully, right? The cords, they vibrate and you can push the air from the lungs. You push through. And is it just or uh, uh, try that. I don't know. It's not that much practical application right now, but just to get control of your vocal cords, say A, and then say, no, wait a minute. A, is that a good one? A, A, E, E. E is better. E, 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 E. Just play with that a little bit. And hear E coming in, bam, and E just comes in a more gentle way. Okay. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard. Then we have hard. Oh, not as. I want you to connect that. Oh, that's a T tap. That's why the red thing, right? Not as hard. Not as hard, Janakte. It's not as hard. Not as. Not as hard. It's a T tap, classic T tap, because you have stressed vowel, T, unstressed vowel. And then it's a T tap. Not as hard. Hard is hard for you to say, the R vowel. So remember, if you are curling your tongue up, sort of Japanese style, or then what that does is it locks your jaw. If I curl my tongue up, I can't really open my jaw. So the way you got to get around that, I mean, ideally you do R this way, the way I taught you, not this way, but this way. But regardless, you start with ah. So put your tongue down because all of you can do ah nicely. You can open up ah. It's not, there's nothing restricting your jaw movement. Ah. So the point is when you open up to this vowel, you open with ah. Don't begin the R until you start to close. So you open fully, and as you're closing, your tongue comes up this way or however you make R. So ha, ha. Just start with ha. Hard. It's hard. Keep your tongue down. If you want, feel the bottom of your tongue on the floor of your mouth. Ha. When you do ah, the tongue sort of pulls back a little bit like that, but feel it down. Keep it down, and then hard. Even if I make kind of a Japanese R, hard. The R is not that great, curling your tongue, but you can hear, you get the full ah, hard. How about sharp? Sharp. So keep the tongue down so you can do ah fully. How about marvelous? Marvelous. You're marvelous. How about car? Time to get in the car. Okay, so hard, hard. Ah. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. May, a, right? Taught, aw, a, aw, and e, as you may have been taught to believe. Now, as I've said, like with the word and, if you stop for a long time, then, and you start with as or and, if we hear clearly as, that's going to sound really weird. The word, as we all know, is as, right? But when it's in context, in flow, it's smaller because it's unstressed. It's not as hard as, right? If I would, it's not as hard as you, that would be what, it's not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. But this sentence, you got to keep that meaning flowing, is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. May have been, have is schwa, may have been, have been, we have I again, may have been taught, and a T stop. May have been taught to believe. Get that L in there really nicely. La. Remember, it's the release of L. Believe. May have been taught to believe. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. One more. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. Any questions? Anything at all? No question. All right, then let us practice. And I wonder who goes first today. Oh, it's Yukiko-san. I don't know. Again, I was not on, so I don't know who actually showed up first, but you really want to
Neither.
go. What? You did? Okay.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Yeah. Your pronunciation is good.
Yay!
I mean, there's lots of little things we can tweak, but it's very easy to understand. And, but I want you to, you know, try to say it in a more natural way because the way you're saying it is like, I'm focusing on pronunciation, which is good. So the natural life of the meaning. So try again, do after me. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
That was even better than the first time. That was better. Do it again. Maybe I have a good influence on you or something. And let's speed it up a little bit. Or maybe my tempo's okay and you were a little slower. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Okay, you did a little bit of pronunciation, only
あ、
ほんのちょっと.
そ
I
う、
mean, it
そう
was
思ってた。
pretty close, but I could hear a little bit of the ow, pronunciation,
That I have
pronunciation.
been believed.
What?
I have been believed pronunciation until now.
You were taught to believe, is what you mean. You were
No,
taught to, oh,
somehow I believe so.
you believed it
うん
was
うん。
pronunciation? No, I've corrected you before. I've corrected everybody 50 times. Um, right? Pronounce is the verb,
あ、なるほど。
pronunciation is the,
ああ、そういうことか。
yeah. So you're right with pronounce. So you didn't
うん。
know. Oh my gosh. I'm a terrible teacher. If you didn't know that after all these years, I know I've said it many times. Pronounce. Everybody after me. How do you pronounce this word?
Pronounce.
What is the pronunciation of this word?
Pronunciation.
How do I pronounce the word pronunciation? Okay. All right. So one more time after me. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Pretty good. Pronunciation. Yeah. I mean, as we get faster, some of the little things kind of slip a little bit. We'll do one more time. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
As may have. I didn't hear the you. As you may have.
As you may have been taught to believe.
It's very fast. Yeah. Okay. But you sound excellent.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So maybe Masa, you are next, or Takashi. Who is next? You two, fight it out. Because I keep.
I think Masa is the second.
Okay, Masa.
Improving your pronunciation not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Do it again.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught.
Uh, As you may have been taught to believe.
Yeah, put the emphasis on may.
May.
I mean, it's not wrong as you may be taught to believe. He was taught to believe something different, but this is a general statement about, okay, can you say hard? It's hard to say
Oh.
hard, I know. But you did open up, which was nice, but then there was no R. It sounded like hard. So go for me slowly. Open up with the ha, and then
Hard.
as you close, ha, make the ha with no R at all. Keep the tongue down. Hard,
Hard.
hard,
Hard.
ha. I can feel you're not still not opening ha because you're preparing in your brain for the R. Just say ha, 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 ha.
Ha 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 ha
Yeah,
ha.
don't laugh at me. Ha, ha,
Ha
ha. Ha.
ha ha ha.
Hard.
Hard.
Okay. So you did keep it open then howled, but your R did not sound like an R. It sounded like howled or something. Uh Ha, go as slow as you can. Well, I guess I'm not sure how you're trying to make R, but har here. Pull them in here. Har. And of course, the way I want it is this part comes up. Hard.
Hard.
That was better. Hard.
Hard.
That I mean, that was the word was clear, very clear, no mistake in the word. Little weird kind of tone thing, which probably just your tongue might be farther back where you come up to where it should be in your mouth. You know, listen, I go hard. This is like kind of dark hard. I'm even making R the correct way this way, but I'm pulling it back hard, hard. So if I'm touching, coming up, these parts are touching here, not way back there. Hard
Hard.
is not as hard.
Is not as hard.
Not with he. Don't start with he, start with ha. Is not as hard.
Is not as hard.
Is not as hard.
Is not as hard.
There you go. I think we kind of for that word because H is just friction, right? Hard. I think we're opening before we even make the H. It's not as hard. Or as we're ha, ha, ha. And you were kind of going something like not as and then opening ah. So there was some little strange thing. Not as hard
Not as hard
as you may have been taught to believe.
as you may have been taught to believe.
Not believe, believe. I need to hear that first syllable more. Believe.
Believe.
There you go. As you and taught, open up a little more. As you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have, as you may have been taught to believe.
Right. Not may have. Okay. Taught can open up a little more. Do the whole thing one more time.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
You may have been. You're still stuck in
Uh,
you may have been, but that's because Japanese daimeshi, you learn to make it strong, right? As you may have been taught. You
as
may
you may,
be,
as you
yeah.
may.
I may be late. I may be late tomorrow. I may be. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
And Takashi-san,
Okay. Improving your pronunciation is not hard as you may have been taught to believe.
where's the as? Not as hard. There was
Oh,
no, you said no, there was no as. Do
okay.
it again, the whole thing.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Okay. You're working very hard there. It's very clear. I mean, anybody could understand you beautifully,
Mm.
but be nice now for you to light
Relax.
lighten up and relax. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of effort. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you're taught to believe.
Okay.
Okay. I give up. I believe you. So try the whole thing now and be more soft. Improving
Improving
your
your
dozo.
okay. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
Oh, you said pronunciation. Remember? None. No,
Pronunciation. No,
none.
none.
Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
And it's not SH, it's S. You said
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
So same thing, like with Yuki, you have a little bit of the ow in there instead of just
Okay.
N-
Pronunciation.
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 Okay, and you're still going sheesh. You're not making a clean S.
Pronounce.
Pronunci.
Pronounce.
That was a good S. Pronunci. Then the second one is SH,
Uh-huh.
right? Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
Do it again.
Pronunciation.
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 I'm improving my pronunciation.
I'm improving my pronunciation.
My pronunciation is improving every day.
My pronunciation is improving every day.
Yeah, you kind of go pronunciation. I don't know why you're rushing. Just keep the word. I mean, every time
Okay.
pronunciate. You're doing that fast.
Pronunciation. Okay.
Remember, we want to have a steady beat. Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
That was better. That was more like the same. Do this. Da 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 da.
Da 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 da.
Yeah,
Pronunciation.
yeah, but not pronunciation. Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
Yeah, your pace now sounds more natural.
Mhm.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. See if you can do the T tap. Not as hard.
Not as hard.
No, you're going not as hard. You know what T tap is like. It's relaxed and light, right? Not
Not
as
as
hard.
hard.
Not as
Not as
hard.
hard.
Let me
Not
hear it.
as hard.
Not as hard.
Not as hard.
Not as hard.
Not as hard.
That's better than not as hard. That's better,
Mhm.
but still a little
Not as
bit
hard.
kata. You have to find the right amount of pressure. Do the whole
Okay.
thing because I have to get to the other people too. Do the whole thing.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Right. And you did as you may have been taught to believe. As you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been
No,
taught to
no, no, no,
believe.
no. As you may. May no ho. You
Okay.
yori may no ho ni.
As as
As
you
you may have been
as you
taught.
may have been taught to believe. As
You
you
hear
may
him? You
yeah.
can't help it. You're still going you stronger.
As you may have been taught to believe.
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 Okay.
Okay.
All right. Lots of things for you to work on. Watch the video so
Okay.
you can play with it. Okay,
Okay.
great. And then I
Thank you.
think next person was Yuko Nakajima.
はい。はい。Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving. Ooh, more
Ooh.
improving. The vowel. Improving your pronunciation.
Improving your pronunciation.
That was better. Improving your pronunciation
Improving your pronunciation
is not as hard,
is not as hard,
is not as hard
is not as hard
as you may have been taught to believe.
as you may have been taught to believe.
Taught to believe. One sound, the T stop. So it's one. It ends with T, begins with T, right? So not to, taught to believe.
Taught to believe. Taught to believe.
There you go. So it comes out of the T stop. We make the T stop, and then it comes out of that. It's not another T. Taught to believe.
Taught to believe.
Ah,
Taught to believe.
right. There's no taught, no t, right? It's a stop.
Okay.
Taught to believe.
Taught to believe.
Taught to believe.
Taught to believe.
Yeah. So that would be the same for anywhere there. What to know. I need to know, or what to know.
What to know, I need to know. Taught to believe.
That
Taught to
terrible thing.
That terrible thing.
That right. Everybody, you got that right? We come into the T. Okay, do the whole thing.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Good. It's not as hard as you may. So I want to have a feeling that continues. Your little bit is not as hard
Um,
as you may have been taught to believe. It's not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. You can connect it. It's not as hard as but still it's a phrase. It's not as hard. I'm going da 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 da. It's not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
it's not as hard it's not as hard as it may it's not as hard as it may have been taught to believe.
As you
It's,
may,
it's not
may.
as it's not as hard as it may have been taught to believe.
Good. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as it may have been taught to believe.
How does it? Okay. Pronunciation. You have a little bit, if I'm being very nitpicking, as we call it. Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
That's good. That's all. Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
Not ciation. Connect it. Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
Last time, improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as it may have been taught to believe.
Right. And you can have a little more. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you were a little bit. So you can give it a little more shape there. But good. Very nice. And again, all of this, because I'm saying this sentence a million times, so you can go to the video to get good, accurate thing. Excellent. Shuji-san.
As improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Okay, I need more pronunciate. I need to hear those two vowels clear. There were two pronunciation. I know that you know what it is. So pronunciation. Each one needs full pronunciation. Do the whole thing again.
Pronunciation, yeah. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Just a little more. It still feels pronunciation. It doesn't feel your EA. You're giving it enough. Also, say for me, improving.
Improving.
It feels like you're going improving, like you're making an L and not an R. Improving.
Improving.
There you go. That's an R. Not improving, improving.
Improving.
Okay. Yep, that's fine. Okay, do it again.
Yes. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Okay. So again, like everybody else, you're 100% easy to understand. 150% easy to understand, right? So with all you guys, you're getting so good, it's about just making it sound better, right? Sound natural. It's not like people not understanding you. That level of English is plenty good to be easily understood, okay? Improving and you try to make that not as hard, a little more of a real T-tap there. Can you say that? Is not as hard.
Is not as hard.
There you go. Is not as hard.
Is not as hard.
Yeah, as can be small, not as. Not as. You don't have to make it, right? Because it's schwa. It's not as hard.
Is not as hard.
Because you're opening big, is a small, not as big, as a small, hard as big. So it's like da 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 is not as hard.
It's not as hard.
Is not as hard.
It's not as hard.
Not as. Yeah, you're still making as bigger than you need to. And that just it just makes it stand out a little bit and maybe slows you down a little bit because you're making something big where it can be small. Is not as hard.
Is not as hard.
Yeah, but
it's not as hard.
And your heart is great. You're opening big. Do the whole thing for me now.
Yes. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been. So you're doing the same you thing. So as you may.
As you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught to believe.
You could do both of them as you may have been taught to.
Mm,
It wouldn't
as
be as you maybe may have been taught to believe. It could be as you may, if I'm really emphasizing. But improving your pronunciation is not as and also is not as hard as you may. It felt like it's not as hard, and then you went into the next. See if you can keep
mm,
going into the next. And it's not about speed; it's about your tone. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught. Yeah, many things to think about. And been is short, a two.
Been, as you
Uh,
may have been taught to believe.
as you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught, as you may have been taught to believe.
Yeah, all you people later, you get home, you can go, as you may have been taught to believe, as you may have been taught, or something, as you. Okay, really good. Great.
Thank
And
you.
Ikagawa-san.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Okay, when you not as hard as you may have, that sound like they were not connected. Is not as hard as you. There's still a momentum. You know what momentum is, right? You're moving, but you still have. You may go faster and slower and faster, but not as may as hard as you may have been taught. And then you wake up to do the second half. Keep your momentum flowing. Try again.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
That was pretty nice. Improving your pronunciation.
Improving your pronunciation.
That's better melody. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Do it again.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught to believe. As you may have
been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught to believe.
Taught. Open up a little more. Taught.
Taught.
As you may have been taught to believe.
As you may have been taught to believe.
Good. Do the whole thing for me.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Pronunciation. There's something strange there. Listen to my melody again. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Yeah, I don't know. We're different people. Everybody says everything different, but it's great. It sounds wonderful. Again, I'm saying that all of you, it's so easy to understand you, effortless, right? And that's the ultimate goal, or maybe that's not the ultimate, that's the pentultimate. Pentultimate goal is I want to be easily understood no matter what. The ultimate goal is I want to sound better. I want to have it really kind of sound natural. Good job. And Yukio-san.
Okay. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Pronunciation. Same thing. EA. I want to hear those two vowels a little clearer.
Pronunciation.
Not pronunciation, pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
No, so again, pronunciation. It's not enough. EA. Two separate beats. Do this. Da 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 da.
Da 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 da.
Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
No. Da 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 da.
Da 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 da.
Da 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 da. Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
There you go. Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
Pronunciation. EA. Give it, you've got 5 beats. Pronunciation.
Pronunciation.
Yes. Exactly like,
Pronunciation.
but not pronounce. Pronunciation.
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 Pretty good. Careful not the not too big, right? Pronunciation. Okay. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Good. Now, say it to me. If I'm somebody who like, oh, my pronounce terrible 発音ダメだよ。どうしようかな。もう全然いくら100年頑張ってもできないよって。
Im- improving improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may. Sorry, my kids are so loud in the
I know.
back.
Are they laughing at you?
Okay. Improving your pronunciation is not as hard as you may have been taught to believe.
Okay. 本当？
本当。
うん
本当。
よかった。All right. Sounds good, everybody. So, any last questions for the crowd? Then we'll sign off and go to our goodbyes. Anything? That was good. So things to watch out for in pronunciation, right? Not pronunciation, pronunciation. EA. Use the Y technique so it has 5 clear syllables. And not pronunciation. And of course, not pronunciation, right? Pronounce. How do you pronounce it? Ow. The pronunciation, right? 2 different ways. Not as hard. T-tap, not as hard. Make sure ha, open up before you move into the R. Open up for the ah, hard. As you may have been taught. I mean, it's not wrong to say as you may have been taught to believe. It's completely correct English. You may have been taught. And then it's comparing you with other people. For instance, as you may have been taught to believe. Other people learned it the right way, but you were taught the wrong way. But that's not really the point of the sentence. As you may, it's like perhaps this is the way you were taught. You were taught, you may have been taught that it was really, really, really difficult and you can't do it, but you can. It's not as hard. Not as hard as you may have been taught to believe. In this case, you may, in this case, is all of you, right? Not just you specifically, as you may have been taught. Okay. All right, we're going to sign off now. If you're at home, if anybody's watching at home, I hope you'll practice with this because it's very helpful. And the video is great because you can go back over and over and over to parts that you have problems with. And I think I addressed every detail that you might have a problem with. So it's really an excellent way to review and practice. Okay, so hope to see you next week. I'm going to sign off. And then we can hang out for a few minutes more, people who are live. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again.